Hey guys, tonight we sink into the ripples of a myth that somehow became a diagnosis, a meme, and a cautionary tale about dating yourself literally. You find yourself standing at the edge of a still pond. It's quiet, no frogs croaking, no breeze disturbing the reeds, just a glassy, perfect surface. And a guy sitting very still, shirtless. Hair so artfully tousled it looks sculpted. He hasn't blinked in a while. His gaze fixed, not at you, at the water. This is Narcissus. And buddy, you probably won't survive this emotionally intact. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is. I read every one of those. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shuffle a little closer to the edge of the spring. You're trying to be quiet, respectful, the kind of person who doesn't interrupt a man clearly having a spiritual crisis with his own face. But something about him, it draws you in. Not just because he's, well, distractingly symmetrical. There's a sadness here, a hunger, not the poetic kind, the literal kind. He hasn't eaten in 3 days because he's too busy gazing longingly at what he thinks is the most incredible person he's ever seen. Historians still argue whether the Spring of Narcissus was a real location in ancient Boeotia, or just an allegory used by poets too emotionally constipated to admit they had a type. But you're here now, and it feels real. Damp moss underfoot, that slightly sour mineral tang in the air. A bee zigzags by, fails to pollinate anything, then just gives up and floats midair. Like it too is hypnotized by this guy's jawline. You learn that Narcissus wasn't just any mortal. He was the product of a union between a river god and a nymph. Classic recipe for Greek drama. Immortality adjacent, good bone structure, and cursed with a destiny that required mood lighting. Even as a baby, villagers would stop by just to marvel at him. A sculptor once tried to make a statue of him as a toddler and gave up halfway through because, quote, the clay felt unworthy. By the time he hit puberty, poets were already writing odes. Teenage heartbreak was leaving behind actual altars in his honor. His mother would routinely find hand-carved sonnets tucked under their olive tree, like love notes to a very hot squirrel. But the admiration, it had a cost. You notice how he holds himself, even now, chin slightly lifted, shoulders back, like someone who knows they're being watched, or worse, expects it. You think of modern celebrity kids and wonder if maybe things haven't changed all that much. There's this one papyrus scroll, fragmented, barely legible, that scholars believe might be the first documented fanfic. It describes a boy so beautiful that birds forgot how to migrate. Biologists, to this day, refuse to comment. Here's the boring historical fact of the night. In real ancient Greece, physical beauty was seen as a reflection of moral virtue. Kalos kagathos, the good and the beautiful, meant you were probably great at wrestling and philosophy. Narcissus, sadly, missed the philosophy part. He thought deep thoughts, but only when the light hit his cheekbones just right. So, what was the actual problem? Well, as you crouch beside the spring and peer over at his reflection, you start to see it. He doesn't just admire it, he needs it. He's studying every detail like it might change without warning. Maybe it will frown. Maybe it'll speak. Maybe it'll whisper back all the things he's imagined hearing his entire life. It never does. A soft breeze rolls in, and the surface of the water trembles barely. Narcissus's face collapses into panic. He scoots forward, whispers to the pool like it's a scared animal. You hear him murmur, "Come back. Please come back." And the way he says it, it's not vain, it's desperate. The way someone begs a text bubble not to vanish. You realize this isn't vanity, it's loneliness. There's a fringe theory, a weird one, that suggests the Narcissus myth is actually about ancient mirror anxiety. That early humans, when first encountering clear reflections, experienced what modern psychologists would call existential ego rupture. In other words, some people got way too into mirror selfies long before glass was invented. And maybe Narcissus is less of a warning about arrogance and more of a cautionary tale about what happens when no one ever loves you for who you are, only for how you look. He adjusts slightly, face hovering just inches from the surface. You instinctively hold your breath, worried he might fall in, but he doesn't. He never does. He's too practiced, like someone who's been almost kissing himself for years. You hear a faint splash behind you, maybe a frog, maybe your own curiosity leaping off a metaphorical ledge. Either way, you stay still, the way you would in a museum, a quiet observer of a tragedy frozen mid-act. And somewhere inside, you know this is just the beginning. The spring reflects back not just a boy, but the start of something much stranger. Because before Narcissus fell in love with his own image, he really tried to connect with others. And that is where our story begins. You wander backward through memory well, his memory. It smells like juniper and pride. You're standing beneath the carved stone arch of a modest villa nestled in the hills outside Thespiae. You can hear bees bumping against clay tiles. Somewhere, a shepherd is singing a song that's mostly vowels. And out of the villa steps a boy who should probably come with a government warning. Young Narcissus, maybe 12, maybe 13, already tall enough to make grown men awkwardly clear their throats when he enters a room. He's barefoot, olive-toned, tousled, and very annoyed. He's just come back from the river, where a group of elderly nymphs tried to sketch him without permission. One of them offered him a fig. Another offered him immortality. He refused both with the same bored shrug. You trail him through his formative years, which include being invited to bless harvests just by showing up shirtless, having his name used in 5 different kinds of love spells, and breaking 3 hearts before the age of 15 by saying, "Sorry, I'm just not into humans right now." Historians still argue whether Narcissus ever had real friends. Some say he was adored by everyone and connected to no one. Others argue he was shy, even melancholic, a kind of divine introvert cursed to be popular in public and lonely in private. You see glimpses of his daily life, throwing stones at suitors who won't stop serenading him, dodging wedding proposals hidden in baskets of cheese, and constantly getting his footprints cast in wet clay by totally casual local artisans. Here's a historical fact. In many parts of ancient Greece, particularly during the Archaic period, male youth were idealized in public art and poetry, not just for their beauty, but for what they represented: fleeting perfection, moral potential, and impending tragedy. They were living metaphors in sandals. But Narcissus wasn't just idealized. He was hunted emotionally, spiritually, sometimes literally. There's one story where a sculptor camped outside his villa for 3 days in a loincloth just to glimpse his smile. Narcissus responded by releasing bees into the man's robe. You kind of respect that. There's a fringe theory that Narcissus might have been based on a real boy used in mystery cult rituals, someone chosen for beauty and then symbolically sacrificed or lost to the divine, which, frankly, is less romantic and more ancient modeling agency with horrifying onboarding process. Anyway, Narcissus's beauty soon became a civic problem. During festivals, people refused to look at their assigned parade floats and just followed him instead. He was banned from temples after one too many priests reported inappropriate levels of swooning. One acolyte got stuck between prayer and poem for a solid hour. You float with him one hot afternoon as he trudges through the agora, trying to buy a melon without being recognized. No luck. A group of philosophers stop him and ask, "What is beauty?" He sighs, says, "Whatever I'm not wearing," and vanishes behind an amphora. He isn't cruel. Not really. But he's trapped. Every glance carries weight. Every word he utters becomes an inscription. When a goat herder's daughter writes his name in henna on her arm, he barely reacts. When a shepherd proposes under the stars with a bouquet of time and anxiety, Narcissus just nods politely and says, "I don't really do moonlight." But things shift the day he meets a very old woman in the woods. You follow him along a trail lined with sun-bleached rocks and thin poppies. She's crouched near a dying fig tree, whispering to it. He asks if she's okay. She blinks at him long and slow, then asks, "Have you ever loved someone who didn't speak your name back?" He stiffens, probably not the usual small talk he's used to. She goes on, "Be careful, boy. One day, you'll fall in love with someone just like that." He laughs it off, but her eyes linger, ancient and wet, like she's seen this before. Maybe many times. You step back. The air's gone heavier. The light through the olive trees feels bruised. You know, somehow, that she isn't just a woman. She's a seer, a forgotten prophetess, maybe the last of her kind. Later, at dinner, Narcissus picks at a grape and mutters, "What does it mean to love someone who doesn't love you back?" His father, a river god with great hair and terrible emotional intelligence, grunts something about choosing someone more mortal next time. His mother pretends not to hear. The conversation ends with silence and a wine cup filled too full. You realize Narcissus isn't just afraid of rejection. He's never actually experienced it. Not really. Not until soon. And that's the problem with being worshipped eventually. You forget how to pray. You slip into a place that smells faintly of burned sage and regret. It's Delphi Well, an off-season version of it. The oracle is in her stone chamber, her face half hidden behind a veil of steam rising from the fissures below. There's no line today. No crowds, just you and a boy who does not want to be here. Narcissus stands at the threshold, arms crossed, expression somewhere between annoyance and mild panic. He didn't ask to come. His mother dragged him. She heard rumors, whispers that the gods were planning something, that her beautiful son was in danger, not from war or plague, but from something worse, self-awareness. You stand beside him as he mutters, "She could have at least let me bring a snack." He's pouting. There's fig jam on his tunic from breakfast. It's the first time you've seen him look like an actual teenager, and not a marble statue commissioned by loneliness. The oracle stirs. She doesn't look at him, doesn't even blink. She just speaks slowly, as if translating from some cosmic language humans were never meant to hear. If he sees himself, he will perish. Silence. Then a long pause, during which Narcissus loudly whispers, "Wait!" Like in a mirror. He blinks, confused, then adds, "So no more baths." "What are we talking about here?" His mother gasps. The oracle's voice echoes again. He will know himself, and that will be the end. A historical fact. The oracle at Delphi was believed to channel Apollo's voice through divine vapors. The word enthusiast actually comes from entheos, meaning possessed by a god, which makes you wonder how many enthusiastic people today are just mildly possessed. The prophecy chills the room. Even the steam feels denser now. Narcissus says nothing. For the first time, he seems truly shaken. You exit the temple together. His mother weeps softly. He just frowns into the wind and mutters, "This is why I don't do cryptic women." There's a fringe theory that this prophecy wasn't about vanity at all. Some scholars argue it warned of forbidden knowledge of a boy realizing too much about the world, or maybe himself. That the reflection wasn't physical but philosophical, the kind of self-knowing that comes only after too many disappointments and a dangerous number of journaling sessions. Back in Boeotia, Narcissus pretends the prophecy never happened. He throws himself into rituals, dances, archery contests, and competitive pomegranate slicing. He tries to outrun destiny with charisma and skincare, but it's Echo who brings it all to a crashing halt. You find yourself in the woods again, golden leaves curling on the trees. Echo watches from behind a laurel bush, her hands trembling, eyes wide. She's not just any nymph. She's been watching him for weeks, part curiosity, part infatuation. She's heard the stories, but she also sees something more. The way his laugh falters when no one's around, how he whispers compliments to animals but never accepts them from people. And so she follows. Echo, cursed by Hera for talking too much, can now only repeat the last words she hears. This makes introductions difficult, also parties and arguments. She tries anyway. You see her shadow him through the trees, mimicking the rhythm of his walk. When he pauses, she pauses. When he sighs, she sighs. Finally, he turns around. Is someone there? He calls out. There, she echoes, stepping into view. He raises a brow. Do you want something? Want something, she says, voice soft as crushed petals. He stiffens. Are you mocking me? Mocking me. He frowns. This isn't funny. Funny. And she takes a step closer, eyes pleading, hand outstretched. He stares at her beautiful, trembling, broken, and says coldly, no. That single syllable, it fractures her. She runs, not just from him, but from herself. Her voice scatters like dandelion fluff in a thunderstorm. Echo disappears into the hills, where she fades into a voice, a whisper, a shadow. Some say her bones turn to stone. Others say she still wanders caves, whispering back the words you wish you hadn't said. Historians still argue whether Echo's curse was literal or metaphorical, whether she lost her voice or her agency. Some feminist scholars suggest she represents the silencing of women in patriarchal myth structures. Others just think Hera had a mean streak and zero patience. Either way, Narcissus walks away from the clearing confused, frustrated, and vaguely sad. For the first time, someone wanted him, really wanted him, and he rejected her not out of cruelty, but fear. Fear of what it means to be wanted for more than how you look. You watch him climb back toward the spring, alone again. And you know, the prophecy is circling. The trees lean in now. Or maybe it's just your imagination. You're following the trail of someone who doesn't believe in consequences, even though they seem to keep following him anyway. Narcissus walks with the confidence that isn't earned. It's inherited. The sun always seems to find his good side. Birds chirp in a harmonic minor when he passes. His tunic never wrinkles. It's frankly upsetting. But today, he looks distracted. You can hear the remnants of Echo's voice haunting the edges of the woods, soft repetitions that seem to come from nowhere. No, no. Funny. Mocking me. The trees carry her syllables like they're embarrassed to hold them, tossing them along as quickly as they can. He mutters under his breath. Something about crazy nymphs, and I didn't ask for any of this. He's already rewriting the memory into something where he wasn't at fault. It's easier that way. You walk beside him as he pushes through a field of dry thistles. Ahead, a clearing opens. A crumbled stone bench, a fig tree with one crooked limb, a quiet spot, shaded by high cliffs on both sides. He thinks no one is watching. You are. From behind a clump of rushes, 3 minor river spirits are observing him like amateur bird watchers. One of them sighs audibly. Another sketches his ankle. The third chews nervously on a fennel stalk and whispers, "Don't look directly at him. It gets worse." It does. You witness him turning down a satyr with surprisingly good posture, then a dryad who literally changed seasons to impress him. He compliments her spring blossoms and then walks away mid-sentence. No goodbye. No thanks. He isn't rude in the dramatic sense. He's just uninterested, like someone browsing a menu they've already memorized. You wonder if he even knows what he wants. Here's a historical fact. In ancient Greek courtship rituals, both men and women were expected to pursue, and reject passivity was not idealized. So a youth like Narcissus, constantly pursued and perpetually declining, would have stood out awkwardly. He didn't play the game. He dismantled the board and walked off whistling. There's a scroll in a minor Athenian archive that lists over a dozen mythical lovers rejected by Narcissus. One was so distraught, he tried to sculpt a new face for himself. Another allegedly turned into a mushroom out of despair. The translation is debated, but either way, emotional fungus is involved. You find him later by a small pond, trying to catch a fish with his bare hands. Not for food, just because he's bored. He stares into the water, sees a glimpse of himself and scowls. "Too much sun," he mutters, and then he hears something behind him. Footsteps. He turns. You turn. It's a minor goddess of local fame, golden threaded dress, floral crown, and confidence to match. She's brought wine and confidence. She sits beside him, introduces herself with a name you can't quite pronounce, but sounds expensive. She pours a drink, and for a moment, Narcissus seems open. He smiles, asks a question, actually listens. You lean forward, hopeful. Maybe this is the moment. Maybe he grows. Maybe the myth derails. But then, she says something clumsy, something about his pretty face and how lucky he must be. And you see it happen. His walls go up, smile stiffens, shoulders rise. The conversation dies not in a fire, but in a polite nod. He excuses himself. He walks away. She's left blinking, confused, holding a cup of wine that suddenly tastes like water. Historians still argue whether this behavior is emotional immaturity or divine punishment. Was Narcissus incapable of connection, or was he trying to protect something fragile and secret underneath? A fringe theory claims Narcissus had a twin, a sibling lost in infancy who looked exactly like him, that he remembers the face but not the person, and he spent his whole life looking for it, projecting it onto others, only to be disappointed when no one fits. It's probably nonsense, but it would explain a lot. You find him alone again, plucking grass stems and muttering to himself. He's tried, He has tried. But every time someone gets close, he feels that stinging disappointment, like peeling open a scroll expecting a love poem and finding tax records. And so he turns inward. Again, you know now. As you follow him toward the next spring, deeper, quieter, that something is about to happen. He doesn't know it yet, but his last rejection won't be of someone else. It will be of the very idea that anyone could be better than him. The air feels cooler here, thicker. Somehow, you follow him into a grove that doesn't appear on any map. The kind of place that feels like it's been waiting, not growing. The trees here don't sway, they loom. The birds are quiet. Even the crickets seem reluctant. And there it is, the spring. Still, deep, almost too perfect. You watch Narcissus step closer, boots crunching over dried laurel leaves. He doesn't know why he came here. He tells himself he's just exploring, that he's looking for a place to think, or maybe not think at all. But you know the truth. He's been orbiting this moment for a while. He kneels, brushes his fingers along the edge of the pool. The reflection that stares back is not distorted. It's crystal clear, like someone else entirely is watching him. But someone familiar. He freezes. Something changes. You feel it too. He leans in, and the world goes very, very quiet. This is it. The moment. The mirror, the undoing. He sees himself and doesn't look away. This time, there's no flicker of dissatisfaction, no muttered too much sun, no dismissive turn of the shoulder. He stares, and slowly, terrifyingly slowly, you see his lips part. He smiles, softly, like a boy seeing his true love for the first time. He reaches out to touch it, and his hand skims the water, sending ripples that fracture the image into 1,000 shimmering pieces. He gasps, horrified, and pulls back, waits. The face returns, still beautiful, still his, but now slightly sadder. You don't move. You barely breathe. He murmurs, "Who are you?" And the pool says nothing, only reflects. And that's when it begins. The undoing. Not a dramatic collapse, not thunder from Olympus, just silence and stillness. And a boy who, for the first time, has found someone he can't stop thinking about, and it's him. Here's a mainstream historical fact. The Greeks believed in the concept of hubris, overwhelming pride that blinds you to truth and leads to downfall. Narcissus isn't struck down by lightning or punished by a jealous god. His punishment is internal, an emotional implosion. The fringe theory that the myth was meant to discourage young men from spending too long at the gymnasium baths, lest they discover an unhealthy passion for the reflection of their own pectorals. You watch as days pass. The sky doesn't change. Time here seems suspended. He barely eats, drinks only when the reflection allows. He starts speaking to it, complimenting it, apologizing to it. You feel the tragedy, not in what's happening, but in what isn't. No one comes. No one saves him. You hear rumors ripple through nearby villages. Narcissus. Oh, he's gone off again. Probably with some goddess. Others whisper that they saw him walking into the woods and vanish mid-step. One shepherd insists he married a cloud, but only you know the truth. You're still here, watching him become less boy and more statue with every passing hour. Historians still debate whether this moment, the fusion of obsession and identity, is a metaphor for self-love or a caution against it. Was Narcissus ahead of his time, embracing the importance of internal reflection? Or was he consumed by the echo chamber of his own ideal? Either way, the result is the same. He sits beside the pool, leaning closer, lips almost touching the surface. A drop of rain finally falls, hitting the water like a single note from a harp. He blinks, and you realize he thinks the reflection is crying. He doesn't understand it's him. You feel your chest tighten. Because he's not vain. He's lost. And no one ever taught him the difference between admiration and affection, between being seen and being held. A breeze moves through the clearing. He doesn't notice. He only sees the person who never leaves him, never ages, never disagrees. And you begin to understand. That's not love. That's loneliness wearing a beautiful mask. You wake, or maybe you never slept. It's hard to tell in this place, where time curls like ivy around silence. You're still in the clearing, still beside him, but something's changed. The air smells sweeter, thicker, like rotting figs and fading laurels. There's a weight to the atmosphere now, like the ground itself is holding its breath. And so is Narcissus. He hasn't moved much, just minor adjustments closer, then back, then closer again. You watch him try to find the right angle, the exact tilt of his head where the image is most beautiful, as if perfection lies somewhere between light and illusion. He smiles at the reflection, then tests a frown. He whispers compliments, then he whispers them again, slightly slower, trying to get the tone just right. You've seen toddlers do this in shop windows. But Narcissus, he's in love with a ghost made of water and moonlight, a shadow stitched to his bones. You take a step back, because here it is, the moment he officially gives up on real people. You remember what came before the failed conversations. The two eager lovers, the nymph who repeated his words until her heart cracked. All of them, too flawed, too loud, too real. But this reflection, it never interrupts. It doesn't question him. It's perfect, predictable, uncomplicated, and also completely unable to love him back. And that is somehow more tolerable. You drift into the memory of the speed dating event in Boeotia, a last-ditch effort organized by a few minor deities who were tired of watching him ruin local morale. It was a meadow filled with linen-draped tables, pomegranate cocktails, and one very confused donkey wearing a sash that read chaperone. Narcissus tried. He really did. He listened politely to a huntress who spoke only in archery metaphors. He nodded encouragingly, as a muse read him a poem about the erosion of self under the weight of divine symmetry. But by the 6th table, he'd stopped making eye contact. By the 9th, he was carving his name into an olive pit. By the 12th, he just left. Historians still argue whether this story, yes, the speed dating version originated in actual festival matchmaking rituals, or whether it was a later Roman embellishment. There's a fragment of pottery depicting a banquet with speed dating style pairings, but scholars remain divided on whether it was satire or an early version of The Bachelor. You imagine the aftermath. The awkward cleanup, the leftover nectar, the one suitor sobbing into a napkin, because he was just so present for a moment. But the tragedy wasn't that Narcissus didn't connect, it's that he couldn't. You see it now. In the clearing, he touches the water gently, like it might bruise. He leans in close, lips parting. He whispers, "Don't leave me." The reflection, faithful as ever, stays, but the breeze returns. And this time, it's cruel. It ruffles the surface of the spring, just slightly, enough to make the face blur, ripple, and vanish. Narcissus cries out like someone has stolen his breath. He backs away, trembling, eyes wide. For a second, you see something break. Not his spirit, his certainty. He looks down again. The image returns. He sighs with relief, smiles, and moves even closer, as if afraid that one blink might shatter the illusion for good. Here's a fringe theory. Some scholars believe this part of the myth was originally told by shepherds as a warning, not about vanity, but about the danger of still water. Too many children drowned in quiet pools, entranced by their reflections, believing the face beneath was someone to reach for. Myth became a kind of safety PSA. Don't fall in love with mirrors. They don't love you back, and they don't float. You sit beside him now, just a silent presence. He doesn't notice. You could scream. You could throw a rock into the spring and break the spell. But what would that do? He'd grieve the loss, blame the water, blame you, but never himself. Because this isn't just a story about a boy who loved his face. It's a story about a world that never taught him anything else to love. And so, he stays. Because reflections never reject you. They only vanish. You linger now, not as a guest, but as something quieter and echo. Maybe you stay at the edge of the clearing, watching the stillness stretch like silk, watching him fold deeper into the trance of his own gaze. But elsewhere in a hollow valley drenched in twilight, she is still listening. Echo, the nymph with no voice of her own, or, more precisely, no new voice. She speaks only in your words, and his, and anyone else's, really, provided they've spoken aloud within earshot. She floats through the trees like a thought that won't leave you alone. Thin, pale, spectral, Her body is mostly memory now, held together by hope and leftover syllables, and she hears him. "Don't leave me," he whispers to his reflection. "Leave me," she repeats. She sinks to her knees. Every phrase she repeats breaks her a little more. Not because she's mocking him, but because she means it. All of it. Every word he speaks into the water, she whispers back into the wind. And none of it is hers. You remember how this curse came to be. Hera, the queen of gods. Suspicion incarnate once caught Echo stalling her with chatter, while Zeus slinked off to seduce someone else. As punishment, Hera didn't just silence her, she rewired her voice, severing her connection to language and choice. From that day on, Echo could only reflect what others said, not unlike a mythological comment section, doomed to recycle the loudest voice in the room. A historical fact for you: in Homeric times, nymphs were not minor background characters. They were localized goddesses, tied to springs, trees, clouds. They had domains, autonomy, moods, but later myths often downgraded them to supporting roles in men's tragedies. Echo was one of the first to fall. You watch her now, pressing herself against the bark of a pine tree, hiding from the clearing, but unable to stop listening. "Stay with me," Narcissus whispers to the pool. "Stay with me," she whispers into the soil. A fringe theory, because why not, is that Echo's curse wasn't a divine punishment at all. Some scholars claim it was a metaphor for trauma repetition, a psyche so broken that it can only replay what's already been said to it. That echo is every voice that was ever gaslit into silence, now looped in tragic surround sound. You feel it in her steps, in the way her body flickers when she tries to speak something new. She wants to cry, to scream, to tell him, "I'm still here," but all she can do is echo his obsession back at him, one phrase behind. It's brutal, and yet she stays because she still loves him. Not the image, not the idea, but the boy, the lonely, confused, soft-edged human who used to laugh at frogs and pick herbs for his mother. Before the myth hardened him, before he mistook adoration for affection, you sit beside her now, and even though she can't speak to you, you hear her, not her words, but her ache. She doesn't want him to die. She doesn't want to haunt this place forever. But she also doesn't know how to leave. Because love, real, painful, unreciprocated love has its own kind of gravity. It holds you long after it should have let go. Back in the clearing, Narcissus shifts. He's trembling slightly now, less from cold and more from hunger. He hasn't eaten in days. His ribs show. His breath is shallow, but his eyes, still locked on that perfect stranger in the water. He leans in again, and Echo, hidden behind the trees, leans forward too. Like maybe, this time, if she echoes the right phrase, he'll turn, see her, hear her, choose her. But he doesn't. He whispers, "I love you," and she answers, "I love you." And the pain in her face as she says it, it could crack marble. Historians still argue whether Echo's presence at the death of Narcissus was in the original telling or added later by poets desperate for a more romantic punchline. Either way, the myth remains. She stays near him, voicing his final words back into the world until her body dissolves, leaving only sound behind, and you realize the cruelty isn't that she was cursed, it's that she understood him more than anyone ever did. And it didn't matter, because when you fall in love with someone who only sees themselves, there's no space for you in the frame. Just your voice, bouncing off empty hills. You stand again at the edge of the spring, and this time, you don't blink. You can't, because Narcissus isn't just gazing now. He's trying to merge. His knees are sunk in wet moss. His arms tremble. His breath leaves trails across the surface of the water. Each time the ripples distort the face he loves, his whole body shudders like he's been stabbed not by a blade, but by the unbearable impermanence of perfection. You want to shake him. To say, "That's not you. That's just light bouncing off liquid." But even if you did, it wouldn't work. He'd say, "But he understands me." You realize something now. The pool doesn't just reflect his face. It reflects what he wants to see. And that's the real danger. You remember that one scholar, the eccentric one who once wrote that ancient myths were emotional equations disguised as poetry. He said the pool of Narcissus was less a location and more a device, a mirror built from loneliness, vanity, fear, and unmet desire. And Narcissus, he's solving for X. He leans in further. His lips nearly touch the surface. He says, "Come to me." His voice cracks, hoarse from days of whispered nothings. And then he kisses the water, not a quick peck. A slow, trembling, devoted press of lips to liquid, a prayer disguised as affection. The pool responds the only way it can, with ripples. His face vanishes, blurred, gone. He gasps, shrieks, pulls back like he's been burned. And just like that, he breaks. He begins to cry, not the pretty kind, not the poetic, gentle tears that artists love to paint. No, this is grief, ugly, wet, primal. His shoulders shake. His whole body folds over like parchment left too long in the sun. Echo hears every sob. She repeats them, helplessly. No, no, come back, love me. And in a moment of unbearable grace, he hears her. He turns, just slightly, eyes red, breath shallow, throat raw. He whispers, "Who's there?" And she answers, in a voice not her own, "There." He stares into the trees, confusion, wrestling with recognition. His lips part. He almost speaks again, but then the sun shifts, the spring brightens, and the reflection returns. Perfect, painless, familiar, and he turns back to it. Of course he does. You feel Echo sink behind the roots of a cypress tree, curling into herself like something unfinished. Her fingers scrape at the soil. She doesn't cry. She can't. But the silence around her thickens, as though the forest itself is mourning on her behalf. A historical fact. In certain Greek rituals, bodies were not buried in the earth, but transformed through symbolism into trees, flowers, stones. Death wasn't always an ending. Sometimes it was a metaphor that walked too far and came back with a leaf in its hair. There's a fringe theory found in a fragmentary play by a Roman dramatist that suggests the water Narcissus kissed was enchanted, that the gods, tired of his neglect, imbued it with a twisted charm, a reflection that made you see what you wanted most, not what was actually there. So when Narcissus saw his face, it wasn't his reflection. It was the idea of someone who finally saw him back. You watch him now, cheeks hollowing, posture folding. He's fading, not dying. Exactly. Disappearing. Like a statue being eroded from the inside out. He cups the water with trembling hands, tries to hold the face, but his fingers pass through the image. Again and again, he begins whispering nonsense phrases you can't understand, fragments of childhood memories, prayers to gods he never believed in. And still, the reflection stays obedient. Cruel, you want to look away, but you can't. Because somewhere inside this myth is a truth too large to ignore. When you fall in love with a version of yourself that's been filtered through fantasy, there's no room left for reality, or for others, or for rescue. Just you, alone, on loop. You barely notice the shift at first. The change is subtle, like the way bread begins to stale, not dramatic, just inevitable. Narcissus is still at the edge of the spring, but something in him has gone dim. The boy who once sauntered through festivals like a sunbeam now sits hunched, thinner, quieter, barely a whisper of his former self. His ribs press like questions beneath his skin. His lips are cracked from dehydration. And still, he doesn't drink. He doesn't eat. He just watches, and occasionally whispers sweet nothings to the face that never blinks, never leaves, never speaks back. You step closer. The ground beneath your feet is soft, damp, as if weeping from below. The air smells like moss and the end of something. You hear villagers in the distance. They've started noticing his absence. There are murmurs. Where did he go? Why hasn't he danced at the last moon feast? Someone claims they saw him walk into the hills with a mirror strapped to his back. Another says he was taken by Artemis to become a star. One well-meaning elder insists he joined a traveling theater troupe. That last one seems unlikely, but no one follows. And here he remains, whispering to water, begging a ghost to love him back. You sit beside him for a while, invisible but present. You count how many times he blinks in an hour. 3. You count how many times he reaches for the water. 16. You count how many times he whispers. Stay. You stop counting. Here's a historical fact. Ancient Greeks believed that too much solitude could lead to spiritual madness. The word mania wasn't just mental illness, it was divine possession, a mind pulled too far from the mortal world. Hermits, prophets, poets, And yes, tragic boys beside springs. Some rituals even involved staging mock resurrections of lonely figures to bring them back. But no such ritual was ever performed for Narcissus. They didn't know where to find him. You lean in and see what he sees. His face, but not really his face. It's too clean, too ideal, not tired or sunken or fading. It's the dream version of himself, the one he imagines he could be if he were finally understood. It's not reflection, it's projection. And that's the cruelest part. Because he's no longer looking at himself, he's looking at the person he thinks would finally complete him. There is a fringe theory that the pool itself was cursed long before Narcissus found it, that it was once used by Aphrodite to punish lovers who mistook obsession for affection. That, when you look into it, you don't see yourself, you see the version of yourself that someone else once loved. And once you see that, you'll never settle for reality again. Whether or not that's true, Narcissus is clearly under a spell of his own making. He reaches out again, whispers, "Please, just one touch." And when his fingers brush the surface this time, they linger, the ripples wobble, and for a heartbeat, the image stays stable, and he gasps, smiles. It worked, he says, eyes wide with wonder. But it didn't. You watch the reflection twist, distort. His smile in the water droops, the jawline wobbles, the eyes widen too far. It's not beautiful anymore, it's too much. Like someone drew him from memory and added details that shouldn't exist. And for the first time, Narcissus recoils, not because it's ugly, because it's honest. That's when the panic begins. He splashes the water, no comeback. He cups it in his hands, tries to hold it, but it slips through, shapeless, ungraspable. The image reforms. But now, he sees himself clearly. Not the fantasy, the reality. Pale, hungry, alone. He flinches. "No," he whispers. "That's not me." But it is, and he can't look away. You feel the grief settle like dust, not loud, just final. Historians still argue whether this ending the collapse into despair was added for drama, or always there from the start. Some early versions of the myth end with him turning into a flower peacefully, a symbol of tragic beauty. Others end with a scream that echoes through valleys for days. But the silence here, it's heavier, more believable, because when the illusion breaks, there's no thunder, just the soft sound of water being water, and a boy finally seeing himself too late. You don't know when it happens, only that it already has. He's still there. Body curled like a fallen reed, breath shallow, eyes fixed on the water. But something inside him has receded, like the tide pulling back from the edge of the world. Narcissus is still alive, but only technically. The forest has started adjusting around his stillness. Ants trace lines across his skin without fear. A bird lands near his shoulder, pecks once at the moss beside him, and flutters off without ceremony. Even the spring no longer sparkles. It just sits there, cold, honest, unmoving. And now, finally, others arrive. Woodland spirits, minor gods, mossy nymphs and vine-draped dryads and half-forgotten deities of echo and rot. They step softly, forming a quiet ring around him. No one speaks. They all know this moment. It's not rare in myth. The boy who reached too far, the girl who loved too loud, the voice that couldn't change the ending. One of the spirits leans down and gently brushes his hair from his forehead. It doesn't move much. It's already stiffening, becoming more symbol than person. A dryad begins to hum low and slow, like tree roots shifting in sleep. You watch as they prepare the oldest rite in the forest. The transformation, because in myth, no one is ever truly left to decay. That would be cruel. Instead, they are repurposed. Metaphorically, botanically, you step back as the spirits gather wild petals and ash, weaving them between his fingers. The ground responds. Roots stir, soil loosens. The air fills with a scent of loam and milkweed. You blink, and it begins. His skin pales like wax, then paper, then marble. But not the shiny kind. The dusty, sun-cracked kind used in abandoned garden statues. His spine straightens. His limbs fall still. And from the base of his neck, something sprouts. Delicate, white. A bloom, a narcissus. You watch as it unfolds petal by petal, soft, modest, fragile. Not the grand kind found in curated vases. This is the wild type. the kind that grows by springs, the kind that leans slightly, as if remembering something. Here's your historical fact. The narcissus flower, especially the species Narcissus poeticus, was widely associated in Greek and Roman culture with mourning and remembrance. It was planted near graves, included in funeral garlands, and believed to guide souls toward the underworld. Even Persephone was tempted by a narcissus bloom the day Hades rose to claim her. A fringe theory far less elegant is that the myth was created to explain the appearance of these flowers in lonely places, as if nature planted an apology in the absence of closure. You look down now and see the bloom in full, its white petals rimmed with gold, a yellow eye at the center, gazing upward, toward nothing and everything. The spirits begin to fade. One leaves a fig beside the stem. Another offers a broken mirror. Echo lingers the longest. She sits beside the flower for hours, days, or maybe forever. No one knows. Her whispers become wind. Her heartbreak becomes myth. And Narcissus, he doesn't vanish. He simply becomes something that can't move or speak but still makes people stop and stare. Because even in death, his beauty remains. Only now, no one wants to possess it. They just remember. You drift now not away from the clearing, but above it, weightless, thoughtful, like ash curling in lazy spirals. The story feels done, doesn't it? A boy turned into a flower, a tragedy neatly pressed between poetry and moss. But myths, they rarely stay put, because as the centuries rolled forward, the narcissus flower kept blooming. And people kept asking why. First, it was the Romans, never ones to let a myth go unadapted. They plucked the story like a ripe grape and squeezed out their own version, less about tragedy, more about symbolism. The Narcissus became a fixture in Roman funeral customs, a gentle nod to the impermanence of beauty and the fragility of identity. They'd lay narcissus flowers on graves, tuck them into the folds of white burial robes, not out of grief, necessarily, but out of aesthetic principle. He died beautifully, they'd say, as if beauty somehow softened the blow. You float beside a Roman woman arranging a funerary bouquet. She's not crying, just focused, folding petals with a tenderness reserved for things that never asked to be understood. He was so quiet, she says to no one, always watching. She doesn't know his name, but the flower does. A historical fact. Roman authors like Ovid helped popularize the Narcissus myth through poetry, shaping its more emotional, human-centered versions. Ovid's Metamorphoses is where we get the enduring image of the boy who wastes away at a spring, trapped by longing for his own reflection. And from there, the myth didn't fade. It spread. You drift now to a medieval monk, hunched in candlelight, sketching a narcissus into the margin of an illuminated manuscript. His fingers are ink-stained, and his back aches, but he draws the bloom with care, not just as decoration but as warning. Next to it, he scribbles a tiny Latin phrase, "Beware the mirror that never blinks." A fringe theory floats up centuries later in an obscure 19th century French botanical journal. The author, a melancholic gardener named Lucien, claimed that narcissus bulbs weep if planted near sources of running water. It is as if the soil remembers the boy, he wrote, and mourns the gaze he could never turn outward. Lucien's theory was dismissed, of course, but you wonder, you drift onward. Through Renaissance salons where artists fawned over the myth like gossipy patrons, they painted Narcissus as a demigod, as a symbol of doomed youth, as a mirror for their own impossible standards, always crouched beside water, always too perfect to be real. You land softly in front of one of these paintings, lush oil strokes, curls of shadow and cheekbone. He looks at you, forever paused, never blinking. You notice something. Though the reflection in the water doesn't quite match, the face in the water is smiling. The real Narcissus in the painting, frowning. And you feel it, that ancient split, the gap between what we show and what we feel, between performance and truth. The myth isn't about vanity, it's about illusion, and how we cling to it until it erases us. You drift into the 1800s now. Science is blooming alongside poetry. One particular physician in Vienna grows obsessed with the myth, not because of flowers or funerals, but because of behavior. His name is Sigmund Freud, and he takes the myth and makes it weird. He coins the term narcissism to describe a developmental phase where a child loves themselves more than anything else, a necessary stage, he says, but dangerous if never outgrown. He writes essays, then rewrites them, then rewrites the rewrites. And soon, Narcissus isn't a myth anymore. He's a diagnosis. Historians still argue whether Freud did the story justice. Some say he repurposed it for science. Others say he hijacked a myth about grief and made it about egos and mother issues. Either way, the Narcissus flower now has a clinical shadow. You can almost hear it. Exhibits signs of grandiosity, lacks empathy, possibly obsessed with Instagram. Okay, that last part came later, but not much later. Because now you drift past screens, so many screens, selfies, filters, angles, edits, likes, reels, reflections, validation loops. The pool has multiplied. It's in your pocket. It's in your hand. It's blinking at you with tiny hearts and thumbs. And somewhere in there is Narcissus, not in the flower, not in the diagnosis, but in the moment someone stares just a second too long at their own curated image and whispers, "I love you," and the screen whispers back, just as hollow. You hover now at the lip of the present. The myth still pulses, but it's quieter, folded into culture like a watermark. You start to notice it in strange places. A perfume named Narcissus, a luxury car ad featuring a man smiling at himself in the rear view, a dating profile that reads, "Looking for someone as amazing as me," a pop song chorus repeating me with such sincerity it almost becomes a prayer. You realize Narcissus didn't vanish. He just diversified. Somewhere in a psychology textbook, his name is boxed in bold, tied to a list of traits that feel both oddly familiar and strangely sad. An inflated sense of self-importance, a deep need for admiration, a lack of empathy for others, a fragile self-esteem underneath it all. Textbook narcissism. But real life, pharmacie. You sit quietly beside a college student hunched over a phone, adjusting her face in the camera preview, flipping through filters like spell books. She sighs, deletes, retakes, smiles wider, holds it too long, then freezes when a notification buzzes. One like, then two, then none for 5 minutes. She stares at her screen like it's a mirror. You move now to a boy in his 20s, rehearsing his podcast intro for the 12th time. His voice shifts subtly deeper, smoother, more curated. His eyes flick between camera and notes until the reflection on the screen doesn't look like him anymore. It looks like someone people might listen to. He's not vain. He's terrified. And suddenly, the myth doesn't feel ancient at all. It feels familiar. Because the line between confidence and performance, between self-love and self-branding, has grown razor thin. And the longer we stare into our devices, our mirrors, our carefully crafted U-shaped windows to the world, the more we risk falling in. Here's a historical fact. In the early 20th century, as mirrors became mass-produced, psychologists began studying mirror stage development in infants when a baby recognizes its reflection as me. It's considered the birth of self-awareness, but also, oddly, the beginning of confusion. Because from that point on, we're split. The self we are, and the self we see, and that split, it grows. You float into an art gallery now, where a modern installation recreates the Narcissus myth using digital mirrors. Each panel reflects not your image, but a stylized version, taller, thinner, clearer skin, warmer lighting. Visitors smile, then falter. Some laugh, others linger too long. A fringe theory presented in the exhibit catalog suggests that Narcissus didn't fall in love with himself, but with an idea of who he could be. That the reflection wasn't recognition. It was aspiration. And that's what doomed him. Because aspiration never loves you back. You drift past teenagers trading compliments that sound like stock tips. "I like your new version. You look more like your page now." You're almost there. You listen to people say, "I just need to fix a few things about myself first," as if personality were a software update. And somewhere, faintly, you hear echo, still whispering, not just his words anymore, everyone's. You recognize her in reposted captions, in comments, like same in mood and me. Echo is the algorithm now responding, repeating, never creating. And beneath it all, still Narcissus, still searching, still staring, still asking the same question. Is this how they'll finally see me? But the answer never comes, because reflections don't speak. They only respond. You step back, away from screens, away from curated dreams, and wonder if the original Narcissus had been taught not just how to be admired, but how to be known. Would the myth have ended differently? Would he have looked into the pool and said not, "I love you, but I see you, I know you, and that's enough"? Maybe, or maybe he would have still stayed too long. Because knowing yourself is the hardest thing to do when the world keeps showing you someone else. You find yourself in a quiet office. Now, books stacked like leaning towers, the air heavy with old ink and dust. A soft tick of a clock slices the silence. A man sits at a wooden desk, scribbling furiously. Thick glasses, deep frown lines, a portrait of Athena on the wall behind him. Freud, the father of psychoanalysis, the guy who took a tragic myth and rewired it into theory. He never met Narcissus, of course, but he understood him at least. He thought he did. To Freud, Narcissus was the perfect case study. A boy who couldn't love others because he hadn't first properly loved himself. Or, possibly, because he loved himself too much. It depends on which essay you read and how much coffee Freud had that day. You peer over his shoulder and read the sentence he's underlining. Narcissism may be a necessary phase in early ego development. Necessary, but dangerous if prolonged. Freud was fascinated by that edge, the line between healthy self-regard and toxic self-absorption. He believed that children must pass through a narcissistic phase before learning to care about others. It's how we build the ego, but get stuck there. And the result is someone who sees every relationship as a mirror, not a person, a reflection. You glance across the desk and spot a sketch of a boy kneeling at a spring labeled narcissistic regression. Not very poetic, but very on brand. Here's a historical fact. Freud's essay on narcissism, 1914, introduced the concept into modern psychology, linking self-love to a range of behaviors, including megalomania, romantic obsession, and even certain mental illnesses. It was revolutionary and wildly controversial. Critics accused Freud of overreaching, of pathologizing normal behavior. And honestly, they had a point. Because not everyone who takes a selfie is spiraling into classical Greek doom. But still, Freud's interpretation stuck. It shaped everything that followed, from therapy sessions to pop culture diagnoses to awkward family dinners where someone whispers, "She's such a narcissist," while passing the bread. You drift from Freud's office into a modern-day psychology class. PowerPoint slides blink through DSM criteria. The term narcissistic personality disorder is bolded on screen. A student raises their hand and asks, "Wait, so is narcissism a spectrum?" The professor pauses, nods slowly. "Yes," she says, "a very slippery one." She goes on, "Not all narcissists are grandiose. Some are vulnerable, defensive, anxious beneath the armor. They crave admiration. Yes, but fear rejection more. They might seem confident, but inside, they're begging to be mirrored in a way that finally makes them feel whole." You sit with that for a moment, because suddenly, Narcissus isn't the villain. He's the prototype for every person who's ever stared into someone else's eyes, hoping desperately to see something lovable reflected back. That's not ego, that's need. You drift again, through magazine headlines and online quizzes and clickbait articles titled 10 Signs You're Dating a Narcissist, or Are You a Secret Narcissist? You find it strange how quickly a myth turned into a weapon, an accusation, a buzzword. We throw it around now, not like a diagnosis, but like an insult wrapped in pop psychology ribbon. You post too many gym pics, narcissist. You talk about yourself too much on dates, narcissist. You don't text back immediately, must be a narcissist. And echo, she's in the comments, typing back the same tired replies. You up? Same. Wow. The myth mutated, and so did the meaning. A fringe theory from a modern therapist blog claims that the rise of everyday narcissism is less about inflated egos and more about fractured connection. That when people feel unseen, unheard, unheld, they compensate by creating reflections of themselves that look stronger, glossier, louder, not to seduce others, but to survive. You sit in a subway car now, watching dozens of people scroll their screens. Their reflections glow in the glass windows. Some look bored, some look tired, a few look scared, and one or two, they smile, but only at themselves, just like he did. You find yourself in a sterile hallway, now fluorescent lights buzzing faintly overhead, a clinic, counseling center. Maybe the waiting room is quiet except for the occasional flipping of a magazine page and the mechanical drip of a coffee machine no one is using. Across the room, a man stares at his reflection in the darkened glass of the window. He's not handsome, not in the obvious, ruin-a-festival way that Narcissus was, but he's trying. Shirt neatly pressed, hair carefully styled. A faint scent of cologne still lingers. He tilts his head, adjusts the angle, frowns, then sighs and looks away. You sit beside him invisibly, watching. His foot taps, his fingers twitch, and you know the truth before the clipboard ever arrives. He doesn't like what he sees, but he doesn't trust anyone else to look for him. The therapist eventually calls his name. He rises, smooths his shirt again, walks into the room like a man approaching judgment. He's not here to talk about narcissism. He's here to talk about being tired all the time, about how people don't really see him, about how he tries to say the right things and gets accused of being fake. He confesses after several sessions that he sometimes stares at himself in the mirror for too long. Not out of admiration, out of confusion. Is that really me? He asks. Is that what they see? The therapist listens, doesn't judge, and somewhere in the margins of her notes, the word narcissistic tendencies quietly lands, not as a condemnation, as a starting point, a historical fact. The modern understanding of narcissism has evolved into three main categories: grandiose, vulnerable, and communal. Grandiose narcissists are the loud, self-assured ones. Vulnerable narcissists are anxious, defensive, often deeply insecure. Communal narcissists want admiration for their kindness, their goodness. They build identity around being needed. All of them reflect Narcissus, just wearing different masks. You drift again into a high school cafeteria where a teenage boy flinches when his selfie only gets 7 likes, into a boardroom where a CEO quotes himself in a meeting, smiling as he speaks, into a kitchen where a young woman rehearses how she'll post about her breakup sad, but just glowing enough to look like strength. They're not villains. They're not gods. They're just people staring into screens, waiting to feel real. You hear whispers now, soft and familiar, echo again, but different. This time, not repeating his words, repeating theirs, fragments from the modern world. I just want someone to see me. I'm not as confident as I look. Do you think I'm enough? Do you think I'm enough? Do you think I'm enough? You follow the sound back to the forest, to the clearing. The flower is still there. The narcissus bloom, bowed slightly under the weight of a morning dew. No shrine, no plaque. Just the quiet acknowledgement of what once was. A fringe theory from an obscure 1970s folklore journal claims the narcissus flower doesn't symbolize vanity at all, but awakening, that its bloom is the soul finally recognizing itself, not with pride, but with gentleness. That maybe the myth was never a punishment, just a transformation misunderstood. You kneel beside the flower now, close enough to see your own reflection in the water. It's not flattering. It's not tragic. It's just you, tired, curious, human. And for a moment, you wonder if Narcissus had seen this version of himself. This honest, unfiltered, gently flawed image. Would he have stayed? Would he have smiled? Would he have walked away? Or would he have knelt, as he did, and whispered, not I love you, but it's okay, I know you. And maybe that would have been enough. You return one last time to the spring. The light has changed. It's dusk now, honey-colored and low, casting long shadows across the moss. The forest holds its breath, not out of fear or grief, but reverence, as if it, too, has learned something. The flower still blooms by the water's edge. The narcissus. Its petals are paler now, its stem slightly bent, as though bowing to the reflection it no longer needs. You crouch beside it, hands in the cool soil, and for the first time, You look into the pool not as a myth keeper or a witness, but as yourself. And there you are. Your face, but not a fantasy, not a filtered version, not a dream of what someone might love. Just you, tired eyes, smaller joys, quiet ache, and yet still here, still breathing, still willing to look. Narcissus no longer stares from the water. His story has settled into silence, like dust on an old frame. The spring reflects only what you bring to it now, and that's the quiet ending. Most myths never get perspective. You remember the arc, the beautiful boy, the prophecy, the endless rejections, the spring, the kiss, the unraveling. You remember Echo, still hiding in the roots of your memory, repeating the final line he never heard. You were never alone. You remember all the versions of the myth, the poetic, the psychological, the pop cultural, each one trying to make sense of the same human thing, the need to be seen, to be held not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually, truthfully. And isn't that all he ever wanted? Not admiration, not worship, just someone who could hold his gaze and not disappear. You sit by the water until the stars come out. You notice your reflection shifting, not because it's becoming something else, but because you are less restless, less desperate to see something ideal, and more willing to see something true. The forest around you hums again. Life pulses. A bird calls once, then settles. Wind brushes the surface of the spring, and your reflection breaks into gentle pieces, then reforms. Slowly, still you, still enough, you stand, brush the dirt from your palms, and walk away, not because there's nothing left to see, but because for once you don't need to look anymore. And now, as the night deepens and the final petal of Narcissus folds in on itself, you feel a softness settle across your body like warm linen laid gently over tired shoulders. You've followed a myth through the centuries, through mirrors and meadows, through therapy sessions and timelines, all the way back to yourself. You've heard his whisper in your own moments of doubt. You've seen your reflection in places you didn't expect. And maybe, just maybe, you've caught a glimpse of the boy who never learned the difference between being seen and being loved. But tonight, you do know the difference. And you let that knowing wrap around your chest like a slow breath. Because this story, strange and sad as it was, wasn't really about him. It was about you, your longing, your quiet reflection, your voice in the dark. So wherever you are right now beneath a blanket, by a screen, or curled beneath moonlight on a couch, know that your image is enough, your silence is enough, and your story doesn't have to end in still water. You are not a myth. You are still moving, still blooming, still becoming. So close your eyes now and let the ripples fade. Let the spring go still. Let the petals fold inward and drift into rest, into quiet, into peace.